Panera Bread was never supposed to win. In a world hooked on fast food, frozen ingredients, and meals eaten in a rush, the idea of selling fresh-baked bread, clean soups, and calm cafe spaces just sounded unrealistic. The restaurant industry was convinced customers only wanted speed, not quality. Investors thought healthy food could never scale nationally. And competitors believed that any restaurant without drive-thrus and deep fryers was destined to fail. But Panera Bread didn't fail. Instead, it quietly and slowly became a part of American life. It became the go-to for office lunches, the backdrop for student study sessions, the spot for quiet morning coffees, and a setting for late afternoon meetings. Millions of people started relying on it without even realizing how deeply it was woven into their routines. This isn't a story of overnight success or viral luck. This is the real story of how Panera Bread was built through patience, struggle, and decisions that nearly destroyed the company before turning it into a multi-billion-dollar empire. A story you're watching today on Rise Chrono. The story of Panera starts at a time when the American food industry was dominated by one single idea: faster is better. Throughout the late 1970s and early 80s, fast food chains were expanding like wildfire. They focused on cutting costs, using frozen supply chains, and standardizing every single item on their menus. Quality was an afterthought. Health was rarely even mentioned. Most restaurants were designed to get you in and out as quickly as humanly possible. In this environment, the concept of a bakery cafe inspired by European bread culture felt completely out of place. But this was exactly where Ron Shaich entered the picture. Now, Ron Shaich was not your typical restaurant entrepreneur. He wasn't chasing trends or trying to copy the giants like McDonald's or Burger King. He believed there was a huge gap in the market that everyone else was ignoring, a space right between fast food and formal, sit-down dining. He knew people wanted food that felt filled, fresh, and comforting, but they didn't always have the time or money for an expensive restaurant. Shaich believed Americans were ready for something better, even if they didn't know how to ask for it yet. That belief led him to a small but ambitious concept known as Au Bon Pain. Au Bon Pain began as a simple bakery cafe, inspired by French bread traditions. The focus was straightforward: bake fresh bread, serve simple meals, and create a welcoming atmosphere. It wasn't flashy or aggressive. It was just meant to feel honest. But honesty alone doesn't guarantee success. In its early years, Au Bon Pain struggled to find its identity. Expansion was slow, profits were slim, and the brand didn't have a clear national voice. It survived, but it certainly didn't dominate. For years, it just hovered in that uncertain space between promise and failure. By the early 1990s, Au Bon Pain had grown enough to get noticed, but internally, problems were piling up. The concept was good, but it wasn't great. The quality varied from one store to another. Customer experiences were inconsistent. Ron Shaich realized that this kind of growth, without a clear purpose, could eventually destroy the entire company. Then, in 1993, a decision was made that would quietly change the future of American dining. Au Bon Pain acquired a small, struggling bakery chain in St. Louis called the St. Louis Bread Company. At the time, nobody thought this was a big deal. It wasn't a famous brand. It had zero national recognition. But what it did have was something incredibly rare: authenticity. The St. Louis Bread Company baked its bread fresh, right there on site, where customers could see and smell the entire process. The cafes felt warm and community-oriented, not cold and corporate. People didn't just grab their food and rush out. They stayed. They talked. They worked. And most importantly, they returned. Ron Shaich noticed something critical that others had missed. Customers weren't just buying food, they were buying an experience. The bread, the smell, the calm environment, the unhurried pace, it all worked together to build trust. In a world obsessed with speed, this brand offered calm. And calm, as it turned out, was a powerful and profitable idea. What happened next was one of the boldest moves in modern restaurant history. Instead of forcing the St. Louis Bread Company to conform to Au Bon Pain's model, Ron Shaich made a shocking decision. he sold Pain itself. He literally walked away from the very brand that had built his entire career, all to focus on what he believed was the future. Most executives protect their past. Sheikh sacrificed it. The company then rebranded the St. Louis Bread Company under a new name, Panera Bread. The name comes from the Latin word for bread, symbolizing simplicity, nourishment, and tradition. But Panera was so much more than just a name change. It was a complete redefinition of what a restaurant could be. Panera Bread would not compete with fast food. It wouldn't chase drive-thrus, deep discounts, or frozen menus. Instead, it would build an entirely new category that we now call fast casual. Panera's strategy was incredibly risky. Fresh bread is expensive to make. Clean, high-quality ingredients are harder to find. Open kitchens demand perfect consistency and discipline because every single mistake is visible to the customer. Scaling a model like that across the entire country seemed almost impossible. But Panera was betting that trust was more valuable than speed. So instead of explosive, rapid expansion, the company focused on building strong systems from training and supply chains to store design and quality control. Growth was intentional and careful, not just fast. As Panera expanded across the United States, its cafes began to look and feel the same everywhere you went. That unmistakable smell of bread baking on site. The open, inviting layout. The calm lighting. The comfortable seating. Customers knew exactly what to expect, and that consistency built incredible loyalty. Office workers started holding their meetings there. Students treated Panera like a second library. Freelancers turned it into their unofficial workspace. And families trusted it as a safe, reliable place to eat. Panera wasn't just selling meals, it was becoming a part of daily life. During the early 2000s, Panera started getting serious attention from Wall Street analysts and its competitors. Something unusual was happening. Customers were willingly paying higher prices. Not because the food was a luxury item, but because it simply felt worth it. Panera proved that Americans would choose quality over speed if the experience respected their time and intelligence. This single insight would go on to influence the entire restaurant industry for years to come. Behind the scenes, however, Panera faced constant pressure. Producing fresh bread at that scale required massive regional dough facilities. Sourcing ingredients had to be reliable and transparent. Maintaining high quality across hundreds, then thousands, of locations tested every single part of the organization. Mistakes were costly, profit margins were thin, and Wall Street was always pushing for faster growth. Yet time and time again, Panera chose discipline over hype. One of Panera's most important strategic choices was transparency. Long before it became trendy, Panera started openly sharing calorie counts, ingredient information, and full nutrition details. It made a public commitment to removing artificial additives and constantly improving the quality of its ingredients. These decisions weren't easy or cheap, but they built something far more valuable than short-term profit: credibility. Customers began to trust Panera in a way they simply did not trust most other restaurant chains. As the brand grew, Panera Bread became a symbol of a broader cultural shift. Americans were starting to care more about what they were eating, where their food came from, and how it made them feel. Panera didn't create this movement, but it was perfectly positioned to ride the wave. By the time competitors finally woke up and tried to copy the model, Panera had already built deep roots in communities all across the country. By the mid-2010s, Panera Bread had grown into a national powerhouse with thousands of locations. Its valuation climbed into the billions. The brand became a case study in business schools, praised for its focus on culture, discipline, and long-term thinking. But success brought a whole new set of challenges. Maintaining independence in a rapidly consolidating industry became harder. Global expansion raised questions about the brand's core identity. And behind closed doors, decisions were being made that would redefine Panera's future once again. What most customers never saw was that Panera Bread was approaching another major turning point, one that would test whether its core values could survive at an even larger global scale. The brand that once rejected shortcuts was now valuable enough to attract massive international interest. And with that interest came enormous risk. The story of Panera Bread is not just about soup and sandwiches. It's about the power of restraint in a world that is obsessed with speed. It's about choosing trust over hype. And it's about how a quiet, simple idea, built carefully over decades, can reshape an entire industry without ever shouting for attention. But this was only the beginning. Because the real transformation of Panera Bread is valuation, its new ownership, its global strategy. By the mid-2000s, Panera Bread wasn't just an experiment anymore. It was proof. Proof that Americans would happily pay more for food they actually trusted. Proof that a calm, welcoming space could not only survive but thrive in a world dominated by fast food. And proof that a little patience could be pure speed every time. But as any successful brand will tell you, success brings its own kind of pressure. The very things that made Panera special now had to work at a massive scale. And scale is where so many idealistic brands end up losing their soul. Panera's leadership knew that growth without control could tear down everything they had worked so hard to build. Think about it. Most fast food chains run on frozen supply chains. It's cheap and efficient. But Panera's entire identity was built on fresh dough and daily baking. To keep that promise alive as they expanded, they made a huge investment. They built a network of regional dough facilities all across the United States. These weren't just warehouses. They were the heart of the operation, pumping out fresh dough that was delivered to every single cafe, every single day. This system was incredibly expensive, but it was non-negotiable. It protected the brand's core promise. Panera wasn't just selling an image of freshness, they were delivering the real thing. As more and more locations opened, they had to refine their entire operating model. The cafes were designed to feel familiar, like coming home, but never like a cookie-cutter copy. They balanced that corporate consistency with a genuine sense of warmth, and their training programs were different. They didn't just drill employees on speed. They taught them about hospitality. They encouraged staff to see Panera as a community gathering place, not just a point of sale. This unique mindset helped the brand build a deep emotional loyalty that most restaurant chains can only dream of. Of course, the financial reality was always lurking in the background. Fresh ingredients mean higher costs. Baking from scratch is labor-intensive, which means tighter profit margins. Every economic downturn was a direct threat to their existence. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, the restaurant industry was devastated. Many brands collapsed. Others aggressively cut corners and quality just to stay afloat. Panera chose a different path. Instead of lowering their standards, they doubled down on the perception of value. They made sure customers understood what they were paying for. Generous portions, high-quality ingredients, and total transparency. It was a gamble, but it paid off. While many of their competitors were struggling, Panera kept growing. At a time when public trust in corporations was at an all-time low, customers trusted Panera. Their cafes became these little islands of stability in a sea of uncertainty, predictable, calm, and always reliable. That reliability didn't just get them through the crisis. It strengthened their position for the long haul. Then came the digital wave, and once again, Panera moved faster than almost everyone else. They invested heavily in digital ordering, mobile apps, and loyalty programs. At a time when most casual dining brands were either ignoring technology or treating it as a gimmick, Panera saw it as absolutely essential to their future. Online ordering, rapid pickup shelves, and eventually delivery, all of these innovations allowed the brand to offer more convenience without ever sacrificing its core identity. But perhaps one of Panera's most powerful moves during this era was its public commitment to clean ingredients. The company made a bold announcement. They would remove all artificial colors, flavors, preservatives, and sweeteners from their entire menu. This wasn't a small promise. It was a monumental undertaking that required completely overhauling their supply chain, renegotiating with every vendor, and conducting extensive research and development. Critics were skeptical. They said it was impossible. Others accused them of using health claims as just another marketing ploy. But Panera followed through. They publicly listed every ingredient, explaining exactly what was removed and why. This act of radical transparency solidified their credibility. Customers started to see Panera not just as a place to eat, but as an advocate for their well-being. This created a level of trust that competitors found almost impossible to replicate. Panera was no longer just a player in the fast casual space, it was setting the standard for the entire industry. As their revenue climbed into the billions, Panera's footprint expanded beyond the United States. They began opening international locations, but they were incredibly selective. Unlike chains that aggressively franchised their brand all over the world, Panera remained cautious. For them, protecting the customer experience was far more important than rapid global domination. This restraint kept the brand strong, but it also limited their short-term growth, a trade-off that investors constantly debated. And speaking of investors, the pressure from Wall Street was mounting. Public markets demand constant growth, higher margins, and faster returns. Panera's leadership found themselves facing a tough question. Could the brand hold onto its values while also satisfying shareholders? This tension grew and grew, especially as private equity firms and global food conglomerates started circling, seeing a golden opportunity. Then, in 2017, Panera reached a massive turning point. The company agreed to be acquired by JAB Holding Company, a global investment firm with a deep portfolio of food and beverage brands. The deal valued Panera at a staggering $7.5 billion, making it one of the biggest transactions in the history of the restaurant industry. On the surface, for most customers, nothing seemed to change. The cafes still smelled of fresh bread. The menus still championed clean ingredients. But behind the scenes, the stakes were higher than ever. The acquisition took Panera off the public markets, which gave them breathing room. They were free from the constant pressure of quarterly earnings reports and could invest for the long term, but it also raised new concerns. Could Panera truly maintain its unique identity under new private ownership? Would the relentless drive for efficiency eventually crush the values that made the brand so special? Under JAB's ownership, Panera's digital transformation went into overdrive. They launched innovative programs like their coffee subscription, completely changing how customers interacted with the brand on a daily basis. It was a brilliant strategic move that created a predictable revenue stream and dramatically increased how often people visited. It proved that Panera could still innovate without abandoning its core promise. All the while, the company continued to expand, eventually surpassing over 2,000 cafes. Yet, even with this success, new risks emerged. Rising labor costs, inflation, and shifting consumer habits put constant pressure on their operations. Maintaining that high level of quality at such a massive scale became harder and harder. A single inconsistency, one bad experience, could risk damaging the trust that had taken decades to build. Panera's leadership had to perform a constant balancing act, efficiency versus authenticity, growth versus restraint. What has always made Panera different isn't perfection, but intention. When they made mistakes, they owned them publicly. Transparency remained their guiding principle. This openness reinforced customer loyalty, even when things weren't perfect. Panera's journey was no longer just about survival or growth. It had become a living test case for a huge question. Can a values-driven food brand truly thrive in a system that is relentlessly profit-driven? Every decision now carries immense weight, not just financially, but culturally. As Panera moves into its next phase, the questions about its future are impossible to ignore. Can the brand remain independent in spirit while being part of a global investment machine? Can it continue to lead the industry instead of just following trends? And most importantly, can it protect the sacred trust that made everything else possible? These are the questions that will define the next chapter of Panera Bread's story. Because the final measure of a brand's success isn't how fast it grows, but how well it remembers why it started in the first place. By the late 2010s, Panera Bread had hit a dangerous milestone. It's a stage every successful company eventually reaches: maturity. The scrappy challenger was gone. In its place stood an empire of over 2,000 cafes, pulling in billions in revenue, owned by a global investment giant. Panera was no longer fighting the establishment. It had become part of it. And this is precisely the moment when so many great brands start to lose their way. The problem wasn't a sudden crisis. It was a slow, creeping challenge to the very thing that made Panera special: trust. For years, customers trusted Panera's ingredients, its transparency, and its experience. But maintaining that trust across a massive, complex operation is incredibly difficult. Every new supplier, every new city, every tiny operational shortcut created a risk. In the age of social media, one bad sandwich or one dirty table in one cafe could spiral into a PR nightmare overnight. At the same time, the world was catching up. The very things that made Panera revolutionary: clean ingredients, calorie counts on the menu, open kitchens were becoming standard. New fast casual competitors were popping up everywhere, often using the same language, the same aesthetic, even the same font. The question for Panera was no longer, are we different? But, can we stay ahead? This is where the story gets interesting. After being acquired by JAB Holding Company, Panera was free from the relentless pressure of quarterly earnings reports that plague public companies. This allowed them to think long-term, and they bet big on technology. Digital ordering wasn't just a gimmick anymore. It became the core of their strategy. They poured resources into their mobile app, streamlined delivery, and perfected their rapid pickup systems. This wasn't just about making things faster. It was about controlling the customer experience, gathering data, and building a direct, personalized relationship with millions of people at once. Then came one of their most audacious moves: a complete reinvention of the loyalty program. Most programs are simple: buy 10 coffees, get one free. Panera flipped the script. They introduced a coffee subscription. For a flat monthly fee, you could get unlimited coffee. On paper, it sounds insane, practically giving away a product. But it was a stroke of genius. Customers who signed up started visiting almost every day. And when they came in for their free coffee, they'd grab a bagel, a pastry, or lunch. Panera wasn't just a place they went to eat. It became a non-negotiable part of their daily routine. They weren't just building loyalty. They were building a habit. But this grand strategy created immense pressure behind the scenes. The entire restaurant industry was grappling with labor shortages, driving up costs, and making it hard to find and keep good employees. Training thousands of new people to deliver the signature Panera experience consistently was a monumental task. To cope, Panera had to simplify. They optimized the menu, removing some items that, while popular, were complex and slowed down the kitchen. These were tough, practical decisions, and of course, some long-time customers were upset. Change is always hard. Sourcing ingredients also became a tightrope walk. Panera's commitment to clean food meant constant vigilance over its supply chain. As global inflation sent food prices soaring, the temptation to cut corners must have been immense. Cheaper suppliers, lower-grade ingredients, these are the quiet compromises many brands make. But Panera chose a different path. Instead of secretly lowering their standards, they continued to be transparent with customers, explaining why prices might be going up. This honesty, even when delivering bad news, helped preserve the trust they had worked so hard to build. You might have noticed Panera hasn't aggressively expanded overseas. While there are a few locations outside the US, they've been deliberately cautious. They understood that the brand's magic is deeply tied to American culture: the morning coffee run, the working lunch, the student study session. Simply plopping a Panera down in a country with different daily routines could dilute the brand and weaken its identity. Once again, they chose control over reckless growth. Meanwhile, the food world kept evolving. Plant-based everything, keto, paleo, gluten-free, new trends were emerging constantly. Panera's response was measured. They didn't chase every fad, but they thoughtfully adapted. New grain bowls, vibrant salads, and more plant-forward options appeared on the menu, sitting right alongside the classic broccoli cheddar soup and Asiago bagels. The goal was balance, evolve without abandoning your soul. Of course, not everyone was a fan. Critics pointed to the increased automation and standardized cafe designs as proof that Panera was losing its original charm, becoming another corporate machine. Supporters countered that these changes were absolutely necessary to operate at such a huge scale. The truth, as it usually is, was somewhere in the middle. Panera was walking a razor-thin line between efficiency and authenticity. What truly kept the brand on track was its internal culture. The leadership consistently prioritized long-term brand health over short-term profits. Employees were taught to see themselves as guardians of trust, not just food service workers. This mindset shaped everything. So when major disruptions hit, like the global health crisis, Panera was ready. Their massive investment in digital infrastructure paid off spectacularly. While other restaurants scrambled to figure out online ordering and delivery, Panera's systems were already in place and humming. They scaled up delivery and takeout almost overnight, proving to be a reliable and stable presence in a world full of uncertainty. Financially, Panera remained a powerhouse, consistently valued as a multi-billion-dollar brand. It was considered a defensible asset, meaning it was incredibly difficult for a competitor to replicate what they built. But with great scale comes great scrutiny. Every decision from where they sourced their chicken to their labor policies was now under a microscope. Panera could no longer fly under the radar. It had become a symbol, and symbols attract critics as much as they attract fans. The internal question shifted. It was no longer about, how do we grow? But, how should we grow? Is explosive growth even the goal anymore, or is it more important to be sustainable? Can the brand keep evolving without betraying its roots? There are no easy answers. Leadership at Panera understood a fundamental truth: great brands don't die in a fiery explosion. They die by 1,000 tiny cuts. A small compromise on quality here, an ignored customer complaint there, a slow drift away from the founding values. Avoiding this fate requires constant, relentless vigilance. Today, Panera stands at a crossroads, one familiar to all mature, successful brands. The story of Panera Bread is not a simple fairy tale of success. It's a complex case study in balance, the delicate dance between growth and integrity, innovation and tradition, profit and purpose. By the time the 2020s rolled around, Panera Bread had done something most restaurants can only dream of. It wasn't just a place to grab a sandwich anymore. It had become a habit, a routine, and a quiet, dependable part of American culture. People didn't talk about Panera with breathless excitement, but they did something far more important. They trusted it. And in the food industry, trust is worth a lot more than hype. At this point, Panera was running over 2,000 locations, almost all of them in the United States, with a few in Canada. This focus was deliberate. Panera had learned the hard way that expanding without understanding local culture and habits could do more harm than good. Their cafes were designed around American work culture, American schedules, and American social habits. It was a strategy of depth, not just breadth. Financially, Panera had stepped into the big leagues. After being acquired by JAB Holding Company in 2017, the brand's valuation was estimated at a staggering $7.5 billion. That number wasn't just about revenue. It was about brand power. Panera was generating billions every year from food, drinks, digital orders, and its popular subscription programs. Its predictable cash flow, devoted customer base, and strong profit margins made it one of the most valuable fast casual brands on the planet. Being part of JAB's larger family of premium food and beverage brands was a game changer. It gave Panera access to capital, top-tier operational expertise, and long-term strategic support. Unlike being a public company, where the pressure of quarterly earnings can dictate every move, private ownership allowed Panera to think in decades, not months. This was a critical shift. It meant the brand could invest in complex systems that would deliver an immediate payoff, but would secure its future. One of the most important of these long-term investments was technology. Panera's digital ecosystem just kept getting better. Mobile ordering, delivery partnerships, loyalty data, and subscription models were all refined and expanded. These systems did more than just make ordering easier. They gave Panera an unprecedented look into customer behavior. The company could now see patterns on a massive scale: what people ordered, when they ordered, how often they came back, and what kept them loyal. This data-driven approach allowed Panera to make smarter decisions across the board. Menus were optimized to be less complex for the kitchen staff while keeping customers happy. Stores were redesigned to make rapid pickup and digital orders more efficient. Even employee schedules became more effective. None of these changes were revolutionary on their own, but together, they created a robust system that could weather almost any storm. And when global challenges did hit the restaurant industry hard, Panera was more prepared than most. Its strong digital infrastructure allowed it to adapt almost overnight. Customers who were already used to ordering online and picking up their food could continue their Panera habit, even when traditional dining was completely disrupted. This resilience only strengthened Panera's reputation as a reliable and dependable presence, especially during uncertain times. Of course, success didn't mean there was no criticism. Some longtime customers felt that Panera was becoming too corporate, losing some of its original charm. Others questioned whether a brand of that massive scale could truly stick to its clean ingredient promise. But Panera didn't ignore these concerns. Instead of staying silent, it chose to communicate. They clarified their ingredient standards. They explained the reasoning behind menu changes. Transparency remained a core value, even when the answers weren't always easy or comfortable. When people talk about Panera Bread's net worth, they often focus on that $7.5 billion valuation. But the true value of the brand lies in something much deeper. Panera has earned something incredibly rare: habitual trust. Customers don't go to Panera because it's the most exciting new thing. They go because it feels safe, consistent, and reliable. That kind of loyalty is incredibly difficult for competitors to disrupt. You can copy a menu, you can copy a store design, you can even copy the marketing language, but you can't easily copy trust that's been built over decades. Panera's leadership understands that this legacy is fragile. The history of the restaurant industry is littered with the ghosts of once great brands that lost their way by chasing trends or cutting corners on quality. Panera's strategy has been to evolve slowly and intentionally. They added plant-based options, more customization, and wellness-focused meals not as marketing stunts, but as logical extensions of their core philosophy. Their approach to international expansion remains equally cautious. Panera could probably expand aggressively overseas, but it chooses restraint. The brand as core experience is deeply tied to behaviors and habits that might not translate easily to other cultures. So instead of forcing growth, Panera focuses on strengthening its presence where it already has deep roots. This might limit short-term gains, but it protects the brand's long-term identity. Today, Panera Bread stands as one of the most influential fast casual brands ever created. You can see its impact across the entire industry. Things we now take for granted: ingredient transparency, high-quality food, open kitchens, and calm cafe environments became common expectations largely because Panera made them normal. In that sense, Panera didn't just compete in the market. It changed the rules of the game. The future of Panera Bread won't be defined by how many new locations it opens. It will be defined by how well it maintains the alignment between its founding values and its daily operations. Automation will increase. The digital experience will become even more central. Costs will continue to rise, and customer expectations will keep shifting. Through all of this, Panera's fundamental challenge remains the same as it was on day one: to protect the trust it has earned. The story of Panera Bread isn't particularly dramatic. There are no explosive scandals, no overnight miracles, and no viral moments that define its journey. Instead, it's a story of restraint, patience, and incredible discipline. It has proved that success doesn't always come from being the loudest brand in the room or the fastest to jump on a trend. Sometimes, it comes from being consistent, thoughtful, and quietly reliable. For creators, entrepreneurs, and anyone watching this channel, Panera offers a powerful lesson. Growth doesn't have to be reckless. Innovation doesn't have to be loud. And building something that truly lasts often means saying no more often than you say yes. Panera Bread started with a simple belief that Americans deserved better food, served quickly, in a pleasant environment. That belief has survived doubt, fierce competition, economic crises, and the challenges of massive scale. Whether it continues to survive the pressures of the future will depend on the same principle that started it all: choosing discipline over hype. And that, right there, is the true legacy of Panera Bread. Thanks for watching.